The day began like any other in Arav Verma's world, calm, controlled, and filled with the gentle sound of his piano. High above the noisy streets of the city, in a glass-walled penthouse, his fingers danced over the keys, creating music that painted pictures in his mind. Born blind, Arav had learned to see through sound, touch, and memory. He was a billionaire by inheritance, but his life was quiet, almost lonely, his only constant companion being his mother, Ananya Verma. Ananya watched him from the doorway that morning, her heart heavy. She was proud of her son, his strength, his dignity, his kindness. But she knew one truth she could not ignore. He was alone, not because women didn't notice him, but because the ones who did always seemed to notice something else first, his money. They came with sweet words and gentle smiles, but their love was a mask, hiding greed beneath. She had watched it happen again just last week. A beautiful woman had sat beside Arav at a charity event, speaking softly, laughing at his jokes. But when Ananya mentioned that the family fortune was tied up in trusts and charity work, the woman's interest faded like smoke in the wind. Arav didn't see her eyes shift away, but Ananya did. And that night, she wept quietly in her room. It was then that she decided on something that shocked even herself. She would start a search, not for money, not for status, but for someone who could love her son for his heart. And to do that, she would need to step into a world she had never known. She would become a beggar. The idea sounded mad even in her own mind, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. People show their true selves when they believe. No one is watching. If a woman could be kind to a stranger she thought was poor and forgotten, then maybe, just maybe, she could be kind to Arav too. By dawn the next day, her transformation began. She pulled out an old sari from the back of her cupboard, faded, frayed at the edges. She tore it slightly to make it look older. She rubbed a bit of ash from the kitchen stove on her cheeks to dull her skin's glow, tied her silver hair under a worn scarf, and slipped her feet into cracked sandals she had once kept for cleaning. The mirror did not show the wealthy widow of a business tycoon anymore. It showed a tired, fragile street woman with eyes that had seen too much. When she stepped out of the building that morning, no one recognized her. The guards didn't glance. Twice. The street smelled of dust, frying snacks, and car fumes. People rushed past, their eyes glued to their phones, their minds somewhere else. Ananya walked slowly, the tin cup in her hand feeling heavier than it should. She reached the busiest market in the city, a place where colors, smells, and sounds collided like waves in a storm. Vendors shouted about fresh mangoes, women bargained over prices, and motorbikes weaved recklessly through the crowd. She found a small spot by the steps of an old temple, shaded by a tree, and sat down. The rough stone pressed into her legs. The first hour passed slowly. Coins clinked into her cup from people who didn't even meet her eyes. A few looked at her with pity, some with annoyance, others didn't notice her at all. She studied faces, especially the women. Some carried expensive handbags and walked past without a glance. Others offered leftover food wrapped in plastic, their voices flat, as if checking off a box on their list of good deeds. It wasn't until late afternoon that the first real test came. A young woman in a bright pink dress, her arms full of grocery, bags, stumbled on the temple steps. Ananya reached out instinctively, steadying her. The woman looked down in surprise, then smiled faintly. "Thank you, Auntie," she said, placing a packet of biscuits in Ananya's hand before hurrying away. The biscuits were cheap, the gesture quick, but it was something. Still. There had been no warmth in her eyes. The heat pressed down harder as the day wore on. Ananya's throat felt dry, her back ached, and she longed for the comfort of her soft bed upstairs in the penthouse. But she stayed. She was not just playing a role. She was fighting for her son's future. She would endure. And then, as the sun began to lower, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold, a different voice broke through the noise. "Auntie, are you okay?" Ananya looked up. Standing before her was a young woman in a simple yellow kurta, her hair tied back in a loose braid, a cloth bag over her shoulder. Unlike the others, she didn't stand above her. She bent down so their faces were level. Her eyes, deep brown and filled with concern, searched Ananya's face as if she truly wanted to know the answer. In that moment, Ananya felt something shift in her heart. She didn't know who this girl was or where she came from, but she could feel it. This was different. The war had begun. Not a war of weapons or land, but a war to find love in a world where money blinded more than any lack of sight ever could. The girl in yellow Ananya's fingers curled around the cool rim of the tin cup as she stared into the young woman's face. There was no rush in her voice, no hurried politeness. The girl in the yellow kurta simply waited, letting the question settle like a warm blanket. "Auntie, are you okay?" For a moment, Ananya almost forgot her disguise. She wanted to answer, with her real voice, the polished tone of a woman who had dined with ministers and artists. But she remembered why she was here. She let her voice tremble slightly. I am fine, Beta. Just tired." The girl's brows drew together. Without another word, she set her cloth bag down on the temple steps and sat beside Ananya, not near her but right next to her, as if they were equals. The sun caught in her hair, turning the loose strands into threads of gold. "You don't look fine," the girl said softly. "When did you last eat?" Ananya hesitated. The truth was that she had eaten breakfast in her penthouse kitchen, just that morning, warm parathas, fresh fruit, and steaming chai, but she had thrown herself into the role completely. "Yesterday," she said quietly. The girl's eyes widened. Without a hint of hesitation, she reached into her bag and pulled out a steel tiffin. The scent of freshly cooked rice and curry drifted up, wrapping around Ananya like a childhood memory. "Please, eat," she urged. Ananya's hands shook as she accepted it. Not because she was hungry, but because of the way the food had been given. No drama, no need for witnesses. Just kindness. They sat together in silence while Ananya took a few slow bites. The curry was simple. Vegetables, turmeric, a little. Too much salt. But it felt like the richest meal she'd ever eaten. She glanced sideways at the girl, who was watching the market crowd with an expression that was neither hurried nor bored. "What's your name, Beta?" Ananya asked. "Mira," the girl replied. "And yours?" Ananya hesitated again, then said, "Shanta." It was a name she had chosen for this disguise. Common, easy to remember. Mira smiled faintly. "It suits you." They spoke for a few minutes about the weather, the noisy traffic, the rising price of vegetables. Mira didn't ask where Ananya came from, how she ended up on the steps of the temple, or whether she had family. She simply accepted her presence without question, the way a kind soul accepts that the sun rises every morning. After a while, Mira stood up. "I have to go, Auntie. My mother will be waiting, but I'll come tomorrow." She gathered her bag, hesitated, then placed a folded 50-rupee note in Ananya's cup. "For tea," she said, with a smile that lit her entire face. Ananya watched her walk away, weaving through the market crowd, her yellow kurta bright even in the deepening shadows. That night, back in the safety of her penthouse, Ananya sat in her bedroom and thought of Mira. She remembered the warmth in her eyes, the way she had sat without hesitation, the unpretentious sharing of food. She had met thousands of people in her life, politicians, socialites, business leaders. But few had given without wanting something in return. Still, one act of kindness was not enough. The world was full of fleeting gestures that meant nothing beyond the moment. What Ananya needed to know was whether Mira's heart was steady or only soft for a moment. The next morning, Ananya returned to the market, wearing the same faded sari, her scarf pulled low over her forehead. The air was thick with the smell of frying pakoras, and the cries of vendors filled her ears. She took her place by the temple steps once again, her cup beside her. Hours passed. She saw Mira in the distance once, hurrying between stalls with her bag full of vegetables. But unlike the others, Mira didn't just wave or drop a coin as she passed. She stopped, came over, and sat beside Ananya again, just as before. "You came," Ananya said softly. "Of course," Mira replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I told you I would." Today she brought a thermos of chai and poured it into a small steel cup for Ananya, holding it steady so it wouldn't spill. They talked more this time. Mira told her about her mother, who was ill and could no longer walk to the market. She spoke of her job at a small tailoring shop where she stitched school uniforms for long hours and how she hoped to save enough to study design one day. Ananya listened carefully. There was no self-pity in Mira's words, no bitterness, only quiet strength. When Mira left that day, Ananya's mind was turning fast. She had found someone with a rare heart, but now came the harder part, finding out if that heart would remain as pure when faced with the truth about Arav. The test had just begun. The invisible bridge that night, Ananya didn't sleep. She sat by her window, looking at the glittering city lights far below. Somewhere in those streets, Mira was sleeping in a small, dimly lit room, probably after cooking dinner for her sick mother. Ananya could almost picture it. The smell of rice in the air, the faint hum of a ceiling fan, the old wooden cot by the wall. Her heart told her Mira was different, but her mind whispered caution. People could be kind to a beggar and still not be ready for the world her son lived in. A world of luxury, pressure, and judgment. If she brought someone into Arav's life too soon, without testing their heart, she could destroy both of them. She needed a bridge between Mira and Arav, something invisible, something natural. They would meet without knowing the full truth. And if feelings grew from there, then she would reveal everything. The next morning, Ananya returned to her beggar's disguise. The moment she saw Mira in the market, a plan began to take shape. "Beta," Ananya said softly when Mira sat down beside her, handing her a small packet of samosas. "I know someone who needs help." Mira looked up, curious. "Who?" "A young man. He is blind, lives nearby, very quiet, very polite. He needs someone to read letters to him, just a few hours a week." Mira tilted her head. "Why not his family?" Ananya's voice softened. "His mother is unwell." She forced the lie out gently. "And they can't always afford professional help." Mira didn't hesitate. "If I can help, I will. Just tell me where." Ananya's chest tightened. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She gave Mira an address, not Arav's penthouse, but a small house she owned in a quieter part of the city. She had already arranged for Arav to be there the next afternoon under the excuse of visiting an old music teacher who had lent him the piano in that house. The following day, the air was heavy with the smell of rain. Clouds hung low over the streets as Mira walked toward the little house. Her braids swayed with each step, and she clutched her cloth bag nervously. She didn't know who this young man was, or why an old beggar woman had asked her to help him, but something about the request had felt important. Inside, Arav sat near the window, his fingers brushing the keys of the upright piano. He wasn't playing, just letting his hands feel the smooth, familiar surface. He didn't know much, either. only that his mother's friend was sending someone to help him read. When the door creaked open, Mira stepped inside. The smell of fresh rain clung to her clothes. Arav turned his head toward the sound of her footsteps. "Hello?" he said. His voice was deep, calm, carrying a warmth that surprised her. I'm here to read for you," Mira replied, her voice gentle but steady. For a moment, they simply listened to the sound of the rain outside, the quiet filling the room like a soft curtain. Then Mira sat opposite him, opening the first letter. As she began to read, Arav listened intently, not just to the words, but to the way she spoke, every rise and fall of her tone, every small pause. It was as if the rain and her voice were weaving something invisible between them. Meanwhile, Ananya stood in the shadow of the hallway, hidden from sight. She watched Mira's eyes as she read, the way she glanced up every now and then to make sure Arav was following along. She noticed how Arav leaned forward, not because he needed to see her, he couldn't, but because he wanted to hear her better. This was the first thread of the bridge she was building. When Mira left that day, she didn't take any money. "No need, Auntie," she told Ananya, thinking she was still just the poor woman from the temple. "I'm glad to help." Ananya's heart swelled, but she knew the real test was still to come. True hearts reveal themselves not in easy kindness, but in storms. And somewhere, deep inside her, she felt the wind beginning to rise. The storm and the test. The days that followed were unlike anything Arav had felt in years. Mira's visits became a rhythm. Every other afternoon she would arrive with a quiet knock, the faint rustle of her kurta, and that gentle voice that somehow brought light into the shadows of his world. She read letters, to him, described the world outside his window, and sometimes just sat silently as he played the piano. He had known many people who spoke to him as if his blindness was a glass wall between them, careful, distant, almost pitying. But Mira never once made him feel small. She spoke to him like an equal, sometimes even teasing him when he missed. A note on the piano. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently on the windows, Mira leaned back in her chair after finishing a letter. "This one's from your friend Raghav," she said. "He says you've been avoiding him." Arav smiled faintly. "I've been busy with life." Mira tilted her head. "Or maybe you've been hiding." He laughed softly, a sound he didn't even realize he had missed. Meanwhile, Ananya watched these meetings from a careful distance. She had never revealed herself to Mira outside her beggar disguise, always arriving early to the little house, pretending to sweep the floor or boil water in the kitchen. Mira still believed she was helping a poor woman's blind friend. That lie was the foundation of Ananya's test. But now she needed to see if Mira's kindness would hold when things became hard, when helping Arav meant sacrifice. Not convenience, the opportunity came sooner than expected. One evening, dark clouds rolled in earlier than usual. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of wet earth. Arav was playing the piano, Mira humming softly beside him, when the first clap of thunder cracked through the sky. Within minutes, rain came down in sheets, hammering the tin roof so loudly that their voices had to rise to be heard. Then suddenly, the power went out. The room fell into darkness. Not that it mattered to Arav, but Mira's sharp intake of breath told him she wasn't used to such blackness. "I'll light a candle," she said, feeling her way toward the kitchen. But before she could reach it, the sound of rushing water filled the house. A leak had sprung in the back room, and the rain was pouring in through a broken tile. Arav frowned. "There's a bucket in the corner, left side. I think the floor's slippery." But the real problem came seconds later. A muffled cry from outside pierced the storm. Mira froze. It wasn't the wind, it was a child. Without thinking, she set the candle stub down and darted to the door. The rain was like a curtain, blinding and cold, but she pushed through it until she found a little boy standing in the flooded street, clutching a soaked school bag, shivering violently. "Where's your house?" she shouted over the rain. The boy pointed weakly toward a lane half filled with water. Mira didn't hesitate. She scooped him up and carried him inside the little house, dripping water all over the floor. Arav heard her return, his head turning toward the sound of the boy's frightened breathing. "Who's that?" he asked. "A child. He was stuck outside," Mira said quickly, wrapping the boy in Arav's spare blanket. She sat him by the piano, then hurried to the kitchen, found a pan, and lit the stove to make warm milk. Ananya, watching from the shadowed hallway, felt a deep ache in her chest. Mira could have stayed dry and safe, claiming the boy wasn't her problem. Instead, she had chosen the harder path without a second thought. The storm lasted for hours. The boy's parents finally arrived, dripping and out of breath, thanking Mira over and over before leading him away. By then, the little house smelled of wet clothes, candle wax, and the faint sweetness of milk. When Mira finally sat down again, her kurta clinging to her skin, Arav said quietly, "You didn't have to go out in that." Mira shrugged, her voice calm. "If I didn't, who would?" In the corner, Ananya's eyes filled with tears. She had her answer. Mira's kindness was not a performance. It was who she was, even when no one was watching, even when it cost her comfort. But the test was not over. Now came the most dangerous part, revealing the truth. Because if Mira felt betrayed by the lie, everything could crumble in a single moment. The first truth. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its memory. Puddles reflected the pale morning sky, and the streets smelled of wet earth and rusted tin. In the little house, Arav sat at the piano, his fingers playing slow, thoughtful notes. He didn't know it, but Ananya was watching him from the doorway, her heart pounding with a decision she had avoided for weeks. It was time to open the door, not all the way, but just enough for Mira to see a piece of the truth. That afternoon, when Mira arrived, she found the beggar woman she knew as Shanta sitting at the kitchen table, her scarf pulled lower than usual. There was something different in her posture, straighter, more deliberate. "You're early today, Auntie," Mira said cheerfully, setting her cloth bag on the table. "Yes, Beta. I wanted to talk before you see him." Ananya's voice was softer, but heavier somehow. Mira's smile faded a little. "Is everything all right?" Ananya hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sari. "Do you know why I asked you to help that young man?" Mira nodded. "Because he needed someone to read his letters. And maybe some company." "That's part of it," Ananya said, her gaze lowering. "But there is more. He is very important to me." Mira tilted her head. "Are you related?" For a long moment, Ananya almost said the truth. That Arav was her son, that she was not poor, and that this entire meeting had been her test. But she stopped herself. She needed to see how Mira reacted to hints before revealing the full truth, you could say. "He is like family," Ananya replied. "And I have been watching how you treat him." Mira's eyes widened slightly. "Watching me?" Ananya nodded slowly. "Not because I don't trust you, but because I needed to know if you were genuine." Instead of looking offended, Mira simply leaned back and let out a small laugh. "You sound like my mother. She's always saying you should know the heart before you open the door." The words hit Ananya like a soft blow. She realized Mira had said it without bitterness, without suspicion. Later that day, Mira and Arav sat by the piano again. She read him a new letter, one from a school asking for a donation for blind students. Arav listened silently, then asked, "Do you think I should give?" Mira didn't answer right away. She glanced at the beggar woman in the kitchen, before replying. If it will truly help them, yes. But make sure it's not just a show for the people who run it. Sometimes charity becomes a performance. Arav smiled faintly. That's exactly what I think. Ananya, hearing this, felt her resolve harden. Mira wasn't just kind. She understood sincerity in a world full of pretense. The test she had in mind now was different, bigger. She would reveal a little more of the truth, but in a way that could make Mira walk away if her kindness had limits. The next day, when Mira came, Ananya said quietly, "Beta, I have to tell you something. The young man you've been helping, he's not poor." Mira blinked in surprise. "Oh?" "He comes from a family with money, but he has never told anyone because he doesn't want pity or false friendship." Mira was silent for a long time. Then she smiled gently. "I didn't help him for money, Auntie. I helped him because you asked, and because I like his company." Ananya studied her face. There was no hesitation, no flicker of greed or calculation in her eyes. It was the answer she had hoped for. Still, the full truth was like a locked chest, and the final key was yet to be turned. The real challenge would come when Mira learned who Shanta really was, and how deeply she had been tested without knowing it. And Ananya feared that when that moment came, the bridge she had built might either carry them all to happiness or shatter completely. The final reveal: the city was alive that evening, but in the quiet lane where the little house stood, time felt slower. The monsoon clouds had finally broken, leaving the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet jasmine from the garden next door. Inside, Arav sat at the piano, playing a soft melody that carried a mixture of longing and peace. In the kitchen, Shanta, the woman Mira thought was just a poor, elderly acquaintance, stood with her hands pressed against the counter, her mind racing. Ananya knew she couldn't stretch this deception any longer. Mira had passed every test. She had given without expecting, cared without seeking advantage, and stayed through both comfort and storm. If she left now, Ananya would regret it forever. But if the truth broke Mira's trust, then all she had built would crumble in a heartbeat. She took a deep breath and called out, "Mira, can you come here for a moment?" Mira entered, wiping her hands on her yellow dupatta. "Yes, Auntie?" Ananya looked at her for a long time, the way a mother studies a child before saying something life-changing. Then, with trembling fingers, she pulled away her scarf. Without the dirt, the ash, and the worn fabric hiding her face, the woman standing before Mira seemed transformed. Her silver hair shone under the dim light, her posture straightened, her presence commanding. Mira's eyes widened. "Auntie, my name," Ananya said softly, "is not Shanta. It's Ananya Verma." She watched the confusion flicker in Mira's eyes. "And I am not a beggar." Mira took a small step back, her brows knitting. "I don't understand." Ananya swallowed hard. "Arav, the man you've been helping is my son." The words landed heavily in the air. For a moment, the only sound was the piano in the other room. I don't," Mira's voice faltered. "Why would you—" "Because," Ananya interrupted, her voice breaking slightly. "My son is blind and wealthy. Too many people have looked at him and seen only the fortune, not the man. I couldn't bear to watch his heart be broken again. I needed to find someone who would see him, truly see him. So I disguised myself. I tested you." Mira's lips parted, her breath quickening. "You lied to me." "Yes," Ananya admitted, her eyes wet. "And for that, I am sorry. But everything you showed me, every act of kindness, it was real. I needed to know it was real." The silence that followed was sharp, almost painful. Mira looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of her dupatta. Her heart was caught between two truths: the betrayal of being deceived and the undeniable warmth she felt for Arav, a warmth that had nothing to do with his wealth. After what felt like forever, she looked up again, her voice steadier. "You tested me. But, Auntie, I wasn't pretending. I helped because it's who I am, not because of who he is." A single tear slipped down Ananya's cheek. She reached out, but stopped just short of touching Mira's hand. "Then will you meet him? As yourself. Not as my helper, not as a stranger, but as the woman who has already brought light into his world." In the next room, Arav heard footsteps approaching. He turned his head toward the sound. "Arav," Ananya said gently, "there's someone I want you to meet. Properly this time." Mira stepped into the doorway. Arav couldn't see her smile, but he could hear it in the warmth of her voice. When she said, "Hello, Arav," there was something in her tone, familiar yet new. He frowned slightly. "You sound different today." Mira glanced at Ananya, then back at him. "Maybe because today I'm not here just to read your letters." "What then?" he asked softly. She took a small step closer. "I'm here to know you." That night, as they sat together, Arav at the piano, Mira leaning against the side, the air between them was quiet but alive. Ananya watched from the doorway, her heart finally at rest. She had gambled with the truth, and love had held steady. For the first time in years, she saw a future for her son, one not built on wealth, but on something far rarer. A heart that had chosen him for exactly who he was, and that, Ananya knew, was worth every disguise, every test, and every risk she had taken.